Okay, here's something I think everyone can relate to. You're standing at a kind of crossroads.
Hmm.
You've poured resources into something, time, maybe money, your reputation even. Could be a startup, could be a home renovation.
Right. A big decision.
Exactly. But now, well, all the signs are pointing downwards. Failure. Logic says, okay, stop, cut your losses.
But you don't.
You keep going, you keep defending it. Why? Why do we, double down when everything screams, stop?
Yeah. It's a fascinating and, frankly, kind of scary aspect of how we make decisions.
Mm.
It's a core concept in psychology and negotiation theory called escalation of commitment.
Escalation of commitment.
It's this really powerful psychological pull, almost like a magnet, that makes us keep investing in something that's clearly failing because of what we've already put in,
Yeah.
because of what we've already lost.
And the sources we looked at, they actually frame this as, well, potentially part of the dark side of negotiation, right? Something that can be exploited.
That's right. It's not just a personal quirk. It's seen as a systematic vulnerability.
Mm-hmm.
So our mission here in this deep dive is really to map out this trap
Understand how it works, see the proof behind it.
and, crucially, figure out how you can protect yourself. How do you avoid getting mentally chained to a bad decision just because you started it?
Okay, let's unpack this.
So at its core, escalation of commitment is this tendency we have to become even more committed to something we decided on earlier.
Even when there's clear evidence it was the wrong decision.
Precisely. And the key thing here, the distinction, is why you're putting more in. The main reason for the new investment isn't future potential, it's the need to justify the past investment.
Wow, okay, so it's like a feedback loop based on self-justification.
Exactly. You're not really investing in the project succeeding down the line. You're investing in proving that your past self wasn't wrong for starting it.
That's a subtle difference, but hugely important. It's about validating the past, not building the future.
It is. Think about it. If you quit, you basically have to admit to yourself, and maybe others, that the time, the money, the effort it was wasted.
Ouch. Yeah.
But if you keep going, you can hold on to this hope, this illusion maybe, that the earlier investments were just, groundwork, that success is just around the corner.
And psychologists link that feeling strongly to cognitive dissonance, right?
Yeah.
That discomfort.
Absolutely. You've got your actions continuing to invest, clashing with the reality the thing is failing. It feels bad. So to reduce that dissonance, what do? Often you change how you see reality, maybe downplaying the negative signs instead of changing your actions.
And that just blows up the implications, doesn't it? Beyond just me sticking with a bad DIY project. Think about huge corporations, government projects.
Oh, definitely. When an entire organization's reputation or a leader's career is tied to some massive failing initiative, well, the pressure to save face, to avoid admitting a huge mistake, must be immense.
Billions of dollars, national pride.
Exactly. You see historical examples. Maybe things like the Concorde aircraft, technically amazing, sure, but a commercial disaster that governments kept funding long after the economics said stop. Why? National pride, political commitments already made, sunk costs on a grand scale.
And here's what I found really interesting. This isn't just us sort of observing this pattern anecdotally.
No, not at all.
It's actually a predictable, measurable thing, validated, decades ago?
That's right. We really have to talk about the foundational work by Barry M. Staw. His study back in 1976, it gave real empirical teeth to this idea. Showed it wasn't just a random quirk, it's systematic.
Tell us about that experiment, because the way it was set up seems, well, kind of genius in isolating this irrational persistence.
It really was clever. Staw created this scenario, a business simulation. Participants had to make investment decisions for a hypothetical company division that was already in trouble. But here's the twist, the control factor. Some participants were told they were responsible for the initial investment decision that led to the current mess. Others were told someone else made that initial bad call, and they were just taking over.
So it separates out that personal stake, that responsibility.
Precisely. And the results were striking. When participants felt personally responsible for that first failing investment,
They invested more money?
significantly more.
Yeah.
They were far more likely to commit additional funds, sometimes doubling down, even when the data clearly showed the situation was getting worse, not better.
Wow. So the evidence of failure was right there, but...
But the need to justify their own prior decision seemingly overrode the rational financial calculation. They were stuck looking backward, trying to vindicate that initial choice.
That must have really shifted how people thought about decisions in organizations.
It did. It demonstrated that managers, well, they weren't always these purely objective decision makers. They were often making choices driven by subjective factors, like protecting their own past decisions.
Self-protective decisions.
Yeah. And Staw captured it perfectly in the title of his paper, which is quite memorable. Knee-deep in the Big Muddy, a study of escalating commitment to a chosen course of action.
Knee-deep in the big muddy. That image, it really sticks, doesn't it? Sinking deeper because turning back feels impossible.
It perfectly captures that feeling of being trapped by your past actions.
I think we've all felt that, maybe on a smaller scale, like a bad investment or even just, sticking with a terrible movie because you're already an hour in.
Right. It scales up and down.
Yeah.
But when we shift from, say, the lab findings or personal anecdotes
Oh.
to high-stakes situations,
Mm-hmm.
like negotiations or major strategic choices, that's where understanding this bias becomes absolutely critical.
Okay.
And what's fascinating here, as you mentioned earlier, is how this knowledge cuts both ways. It can be a tool for influence, but also, crucially, understanding it is key to protecting yourself.
Let's maybe touch on the darker side first. How could someone actually use this bias against someone else in, say, a negotiation?
Well, when you're negotiating, you're always assessing the other side, right?
Right.
Looking for their pressures, their vulnerabilities.
Sure.
So imagine you notice your counterpart. Maybe it's the CEO of another company or a competitor has very publicly bet their career or sunk millions into a specific project or strategy.
Okay, they're heavily invested, personally and financially.
Exactly. That heavy past investment, that public commitment, it becomes a potential lever for you because you realize they might have a huge psychological barrier to walking away.
Because admitting failure would be catastrophic for them, personally or professionally.
Right. Their threshold for pain, the pain of admitting the sunk costs are truly lost, might be incredibly high. So you might be able to offer them, say, a deal that isn't great objectively.
A low-value offer.
Yeah, knowing they might accept it just to keep the whole thing from collapsing completely. They take a poor outcome with you to avoid the bigger pain of admitting the entire venture and all that past investment was a failure. Understanding their potential escalation trap gives you leverage.
That sounds, well, incredibly risky if you're the one caught in that trap. Which brings us to the most important part for listeners, I think, defense.
Absolutely.
How do we build up our mental defenses against this? How do you actually train yourself to ignore those sunk costs that are screaming at you?
This is where it requires real discipline and often putting systems in place.
Mm-hmm.
The sources really emphasize that beating escalation of commitment means fundamentally shifting how you frame the decision. You need mechanisms designed specifically to ignore the past.
Okay, so what's a concrete technique? Something someone listening could use, maybe at work or even for a personal project.
One really effective tool is something called a pre-mortem.
Pre-mortem, like before it dies.
Exactly. Before you even launch the project, before you make that big commitment, you sit down and define clear, objective, measurable exit criteria. You do this now while you're still rational and not emotionally invested or biased by costs already sunk.
So you don't just say, we'll stop if it feels like it's failing. You say,
If key metric Y drops below Z for 2 consecutive quarters, we automatically trigger the exit plan. Or, if we haven't achieved target X by date Y, the project is terminated.
got it. So you're basically pre-deciding the conditions for stopping.
You're outsourcing the decision to the data, to those pre-agreed metrics. Then, when that moment comes, if the criteria are met, the decision to stop is almost automatic. It takes the emotional weight, the self-justification struggle out of the equation. The person doesn't have to say, I failed. They say, the predefined trigger was hit. We execute the plan.
That sounds really powerful, especially for teams or organizations. But
Yeah.
what about when the person who started the project is still the one making the call? That personal bias can still creep in, can it?
That's often the weakest link.
Mm.
And it's why organizations serious about tackling this often do something quite radical. They rotate the decision maker.
Rotate them.
Yeah, once the project reaches a major review point, they bring in a new manager or a committee, someone who wasn't involved in the initial decision, someone with no personal history tied up in it.
Ah, so they have no ego invested in the project's past.
Exactly. Their job is simply to assess its viability going forward, based solely on the current data and future projections. It neutralizes that cognitive dissonance tied to the original decision.
That's clever. A built-in objective audit. What if rotating isn't possible? Any other tactics?
Another strategy is about how you frame the finances. how you do the accounting mentally or even literally.
Okay.
Deliberately separate the tracking of sunk costs. Don't look at the total cumulative investment number. Instead, categorize past spending as historical investment, basically, money that's gone.
Okay, put it in a box labeled past.
Right. And then track only the future needs under something like required go-forward capital. Force yourself or the decision-making body to only evaluate that future number.
So instead of agonizing over the, say, $5 million total spend where $4 million is already down the drain.
You just look at the $1 million more that's needed now, and you ask the cold, hard question, based purely on today's evidence and future projections, is spending this next $1 million a good investment, standalone?
Right, like if I were starting from scratch today, knowing what I know now, would I put this $1 million in?
Exactly. And if the answer is no, then the rational choice is to stop. Because those past costs, they are sunk, they are gone, irrecoverable. They truly are irrelevant to the future decision.
So we've seen the psychology, the cognitive dissonance, the self-justification pushing us. We've seen Staw's research proving we do it, even against clear evidence. And now, these tools for defense.
It all comes down to recognizing that feeling, that little voice saying, but I've already put so much into this, I can't quit now. That feeling needs to become a warning signal.
A red flag, not a reason to continue.
Precisely. It should trigger skepticism about your own judgment at that moment, not reinforce your commitment.
So what does this all boil down to then? It really sounds like it demands a high degree of maybe intellectual honesty, emotional toughness.
I think that's right. Cutting your losses can feel like failure in the moment. It's admitting a past judgment was flawed. But real strategic thinking, real mastery, lies in being able to pivot based on current reality. Minimize future losses instead of trying to retroactively validate past choices.
It takes courage to go against that emotional current, that desire to save face or prove yourself right.
It does. And the individuals, the organizations that consistently make better decisions over the long run, they're often the ones who've built in these systems, these checks and balances that force objectivity and help them ignore that siren song of sunk costs.
Okay, so let's leave our listeners with a final thought to chew on. Something provocative based on this deep dive.
Yeah, let's challenge you.
Think about your life right now. Pick, maybe, 3 things. Could be a big project, a small personal habit you're trying to change, maybe a long-term goal you've been chasing. Now, ask yourself this very direct question for each one. If you had zero history with this, zero investment sunk into it as of today, would you choose to start it now, based purely on the current evidence and its future prospects?
Be brutally honest.
If the answer for any of them is a clear no, then chances are your continued commitment might just be escalation of commitment. It might be that knee-deep in the big muddy feeling.
And if that's the case, consider the real strength, the simple power, in just deciding to say stop. Sometimes the smartest, most strategic move is simply walking away.